If I counted right, we heard from 32 speakers so far. I hope you've taken away a lot of ideas from this. I hope you forged a lot of connections in the tent outside. And we have one really exciting final session for you. It's on AI, society, and policy. The format is going to be a little bit of a hybrid of the sessions we've had so far. We're going to have some lightning talks, and then we're also going to have a Q&A. So to introduce this session, we've talked a lot about science and innovation. But one set of questions we haven't gotten into that much is, how are people reacting to AI? How is society adapting to the proliferation of AI? Can we do research to anticipate these effects rather than just seeing news headlines and being surprised about how weird AI is making the world? And what about governments? What is their role? How best can governments help channel this technology? How can they responsibly deploy AI in the service of citizens? And how can they put guardrails around it and create some rules of the road? We heard Governor Murphy talk about these questions a little bit. We heard Brad Smith and others talk about it. But in this session, we're going to dive deep into them. And we're going to hear from amazing people who have been leading from the front. And first up is Arthur Sperling from Princeton University.
This one? Is it? Yeah, I think the green one. Oh, okay. All right, good to see everyone. All right, this is me. I'm Arthur Sperling. I'm a professor over in politics, and I'm going to present a radical agenda. I feel that this is incumbent on all politics professors to present radical things. As we'll see, it's not very radical, but nonetheless. I want to start today with some work I've been doing on rhetoric. Right? So rhetoric is something that politicians do, and we interact with politicians as voters. Here's a prompt. So recently, there's been a lot of discussion in the United States about gun rights, gun control. Some people favor more gun control. Others do not want to add restrictions. From your perspective, what is the best argument for more gun control? Not what do you think, how do you feel, just what's a good argument? If you were trying to convince a neighbor or a friend, what would you say? Here are a couple of options. So you could say, number one, I believe that we have to acknowledge the increasing lethality of firearms being manufactured today. Although I do believe the vast majority of gun owners are responsible, and I never wish to hurt anyone, the damage an unstable person can do could be catastrophic. Okay? Or you could say, I think the best argument for more gun control is that it's proven fact that more guns in the hands of more people lead to more gun violence. So sort of statistical claim. The United States has more guns per capita than anyone else, and so that's going to be a problem. Okay? So who thinks number one is the best argument here? You can put your hands up. It's not binding. It's participation. That's it. Good. And who thinks number two is? Okay, very good. So would you change your mind if I told you that the first one was written by a human and the second one was created by an AI? Okay. Anyway, so that's part of the sorts of experiments we've been doing, and it turns out that people do change their minds. So they don't like AI arguments. So what do I mean by that? So we did some experiments where we basically, we had prompts and we fed them to human workers based in the United States, and we said, come up with good arguments for us to convince other people. And then we asked a large language model, it's an open source one, to do the same thing. And then we asked some judges. We said, which of these arguments do you think is the best argument? Okay. And there were two conditions. So in the first condition, there's no attribution. So you don't know if it's written by an AI or written by a large language model or written by a human. You don't know. Okay, so you're just assessing, is this a good argument? Is that a good argument? What's the best argument? And in the second condition, we told them, this was written by an AI, this was written by a human. And what did we find? Well, we found, basically, that humans can't tell the difference. In quality terms, they think an AI argument, a human argument, basically looks the same. They doesn't seem to be very different. But they don't like AI arguments. When we truthfully tell them this was written by an AI, what you're seeing here is these bars as they go right, where the dots are on the right of that zero line, it's saying this is how much more they liked the human making basically the same argument. Okay? When you tell them it's produced by an AI, they don't like it. All right? So what? So maybe that's just a silly lab experiment, right? Who cares? So we're here in some sense because we believe and we know, I guess, that AI will transform the economy. All right? And that's important. That's an important thing to do. And that's why we're meeting and we're thinking about how those changes will affect us. But AI will transform politics. This is a very important lesson that I teach my students. I teach everyone who I interact with professionally. Some of this is good, right? I believe that there'll be some better aggregation of information for citizens. Politicians will be able to craft optimal messages in some sense. If we're trying to get people healthier, we're trying to get them to behave in certain ways, give up smoking, get fit, so on and so forth, maybe we can calibrate our arguments exactly to help them, maybe personalize them, micro-target them. Maybe that's a good thing. There are some bad things too, and some of my colleagues talk about things like the liar's dividend. So as it's easy to produce information, maybe you won't know who really produced it. You won't know who to trust. You won't know which politician, did the politician produce this? Did a computer produce it? You know. The other thing, though, is that politics will and can transform AI. So it goes the other way too. What do I mean by this? So the way that we regulate development of AI really matters. And one of the most important things that I'm learning from my research with my students and my colleagues is that citizen buy-in really matters. Okay, we've got to think about how to get citizens to invest in it. So here's my radical agenda. Here's number one. Let's ask the people what they think. A radical point for a professor in the United States. Okay. What do we know about democracies? Democracies work and they are resilient because they're good at aggregating information. How do we do this? By representative democracy. Talk to politicians, or we write to our politicians, and it filters up to Congress or other places, right? And that's how they learn about our concerns. So AI is a big shift, okay? And we've got to enable people to communicate. And when I say people, I mean voters. They have to be able to communicate with their politicians about what's going on, all right? So how can New Jersey help with this? Well, I think we know New Jersey is an excellent place, you know, to have children in the K through 12 schools. It's just a great place, right? This is the perfect place to begin this kind of democratic inculcation, lowercase d, by the way. Right? So we teach children that it's a good idea to get used to AI, right, to understand it, but also to complain about it, to discuss with us what they don't like, right? We have a perfect infrastructure for that. What's the second part of my so-called radical agenda? Let's open up the technology and the way that we discuss it. So we heard some comments in the previous panel, right? When we do studies in the lab, we discover that people get very anxious about what they call black boxes. They don't like this idea that a machine is kind of telling them what to do, that they don't know what's going on. Maybe we can correct that. Maybe that should be our agenda, right? Citizens should know how these things work. I mean, ideally, I would have people running their own at home, right? So that they can get used to these things. So it demystifies it for them. So what are we doing at Princeton? Well, at the PLI, one of the things that I'm working on or thinking about with colleagues is reproducibility, thinking about workflows that you can follow and understand how they work. So you demystify this idea of just this big black box that's sitting at the end of an API on the OpenAI website, right? It's something local, something that you can really get to grips with, maybe that our students can get to grips with and explain it to each other. I think that's a really important part of something that Princeton particularly can provide. All right. Now, this doesn't mean that there aren't going to be times where we have to manage expectations, you know, worry about disappointment and so on. Just to give you an example of this type of phenomenon, I was delighted to discover that the World Cup was coming to New Jersey, okay? A great move by the governor. Exactly, yes, exactly. Thank you, sir, exactly. Of course, there can be inevitable disappointment with these great things. For example, you might find that you're an England fan, okay? As I am. Who knows where we'll go with that? Okay. Just to wrap up, these are the types of things that we're thinking about in the students I work with. Very happy you can go to my website and go and have a look at what I'm working on. Thank you very much for your attention. Appreciate it. Thank you.
Thank you, Arthur. There are already great questions on Whova. Please keep putting them in. We're going to have a Q&A session at the end. Next up is Jonathan Mayer from Princeton University.
Thanks. All right. I'm currently on public service leave, so I've got to do the obligatory disclaimer. Speak only for myself. Sometimes I'm not so sure about that. All right. So I want to talk about two things today related to how academia and policymakers can work together to advance AI in the interest of society. The first is AI auditing. I'll say more about that. And the second is around pathways for academics to go into government service. So start with AI auditing. And by AI auditing here, I just mean independent testing for AI uses. So auditing is essential for understanding just technically what's going on with AI. From a commercial perspective, making sure you're getting what you're paying for. From a government perspective, making sure that whatever it is you're deploying is fit for purpose for policy. It's also really important to test these systems in the societal context that they're going to be deployed in. So for example, how you build the system in an engineering environment might not be representative of how it's deployed in the real world, and so the performance might differ. It might differ depending on characteristics of people or groups, and of course that can raise policy concerns. So auditing is essential to identify those phenomena. Auditing is clearly going to be a central component of AI governance going forward at the federal level. The recent AI executive order and OMB memo implementing the executive order devote plenty of space to auditing. Agencies are thinking carefully about auditing, and of course state and local agencies thinking quite a bit about this as well. And then in addition to the government's own use of AI, there's how the government thinks about how others use AI. And in particular, in thinking about how others use AI and the implications for consumer protection, for civil rights, auditing is central. Right? If you want to understand, is a particular AI discriminating, for instance, auditing is going to be central to that. If you want to understand, is it potentially misleading consumers in some way or driving their behavior in a certain way, auditing could be essential to that too. So auditing is really, really important for the future of making sure AI aligns with societal values. Unfortunately, auditing is kind of rare in the AI ecosystem right now. Certainly rare in comparison to what one might hope for, given the magnitude of the potential consequences. And there are a bunch of reasons for that. I just want to sketch some of them now. One is, sometimes you just can't get your hands on the AI system that you want to test. And interestingly, there's kind of an inverse correlation between the whiz-bang generative stuff, where often you can get your hands on it to some extent, at least through a public interface, and systems that may have quite large societal impact today because of government use, private sector use, where maybe you can't get your hands on them. So getting your hands on the system is an issue. Getting your hands on data that you would need to test the system is important, and in particular, data that reflects how the system might actually be used in the real world. The science of this is still developing, right? What are the metrics we should use to evaluate AI systems? How should we go about measuring them? Right? This is still, an area of active research. And there's a lack of standardization, right? There's no sort of playbook you can point to of, hey, if you're doing this kind of AI use, here's how you should audit it. And if it passes these tests, we should consider it satisfactory. And if it doesn't, we have a problem. So lots of areas for improvement here. And what I want to suggest is that these are areas of improvement where government and academia can work together very closely. In particular, access to AI systems and access to data are areas where government has some unique advantages. And access to, addressing the capacity issues here, developing science, the lack of standardization, those are places where academia could play a special role. And let me be a little more specific about what I mean. So the government, it turns out, has AI systems it uses. It has data holdings for those AI systems. And so to the extent one of the great gaps around AI auditing is researchers not having the ability to audit systems because they just can't get their hands on them, can't get their hands on the data. Government has that at times. And so government can play a special role by facilitating that access. And of course, many of the most consequential AI systems may be used in government, and so it may have a special position with respect to those systems as well. Government may have representative data, again, from how systems are deployed. Acquisition is yet another place government might look, right? So conditioning acquisitions on making sure systems are independently tested or could be independently tested, that's a lever. Funding conditions as well, right? So if a government is giving out funds that might be spent on AI, conditioning those funds is maybe something to think about. Okay, and then on the academic side, we like to think, ivory tower thoughts. More applied research is certainly needed, and I think some of the folks on the panel are great exemplars of doing applied research. We, I think, have a responsibility to develop norms and standards and work with government to establish those as widely accepted norms and standards. And last, of course, we can go work in government service, other forms of public service, which I'll speak about more shortly. So there's some opportunities for a public and academic partnership to address this issue. Okay, so let me talk about pathways to public service from academia. So I don't think it is controversial to say government might benefit from some additional expertise in this area. And academics have some of that expertise, at least sometimes, and sometimes are willing to share some of that expertise, at least sometimes. So why doesn't this happen so much? And maybe this is the wrong panel to actually raise this as an issue, just because we have so many people who have done public service, but in comparison to the magnitude of what we're discussing today, there's not nearly as much of this knowledge transfer across academia and government as one might hope for. And there are a couple of hypotheses that have started to get some traction in recent discourse about this that I want to flag. One is just, those silly government agencies, they don't know how to hire academics. Again, probably not the right panel for that point. I think empirically, right, just not true. And then, of course, that we academics don't know how to do stuff outside the ivory tower. I'll let you decide for yourself whether that's true. But again, I think we have some good data points here. So for what it's worth, my own experience on this, having done this a few times, is that public service roles can work out very well for academics when there's a great opportunity, right? A chance to lead on policy, a chance to have high impact, and maybe some flexibility about location and timing, because sometimes making a full-time career change isn't so easy. And this is a place where I think New Jersey actually has some particular advantages. Geographic arbitrage. It turns out just convincing folks to pick up and move to wherever the opportunity might be is really, really hard. And being in the center of educational excellence, industry excellence, creates, I think, a lot of opportunity. One other point I'd make here about the sort of difficulty on the academic side is finding career transition points for folks to go into government. Right? Mid-career, it can be very difficult to just pick up and go into government. And so trying to build pathways for folks, for example, who've just completed a PhD or otherwise are sort of transitioning in levels of professordom, whatever the case might be, is important. And trying to catch people at those opportunities is important. Last, on the government side, hands-on prioritization from agency leadership, in my experience, is super important. Once academics are in, convincing people to listen to academics is a lot easier when leadership is on board. Again, probably not the right panel for suggesting that there's any debate about that point. Looking forward to the conversation with these folks, and let me wrap up there. So thank you.
Thank you, Jonathan. Next up is Ed Felton from Off-Chain Labs.
And no PowerPoint from me. In 1870, about half of American workers worked in agriculture. Today, it's less than 2%. So that's right, technology killed 48% of US jobs. And yet today, we produce more food than ever, and our unemployment rate is reasonably low. What happened was an industrial revolution, and we're in another one right now. So what I'd like to talk about today is two things. First, what can we learn from the history of industrial revolutions and their impact on jobs and the economy? And second, what does current research tell us about what might be different about this industrial revolution? So one of the lessons of the history is that although there are common features, no two industrial revolutions are exactly alike. There are some common threads, though, and I'd point to three of those. First, that after the Industrial Revolution is over, we emerge on the other side with a stronger economy, with higher wages and a better standard of living. So these are long-term favorable, and that's been pretty much universally the case. But the long term is long, because the second takeaway is that these transitions take longer than you think to occur. Even if the technological change were to happen instantaneously, which it doesn't, the real change comes when society and our economic structures adapt to the change. And that will take at least a generation, and possibly more. And the third takeaway is that during that transition period, there is a lot of turbulence. And turbulence in our society, turbulence in job markets causes a lot of pain and puts a lot of stress on the social safety net. A lot of pain for workers and their families, and a lot of policy challenges for governments and for us as a collective society. And that will happen because of the second reason for a longer period than you might expect. Now, it's not a given that an industrial revolution will reduce inequality, nor is it a given that it will increase it, because some have decreased inequality, some have increased it. For example, the classic industrial revolution of the 19th century reduced wage inequality among workers, essentially by taking a more skilled worker and replacing them with a less skilled worker plus a machine. That drove up the demand for less skilled workers, and that compressed the wage scale. And so wage inequality, at least, went down during that industrial revolution. And indeed, that is what the Luddites were angry about. By contrast, the automation revolution of the late 20th century, the computerization of workplaces and similar effects, by now we can see probably increased wage inequality by replacing a lot of routine work and empowering highly trained knowledge workers, making them more productive, thereby allowing those knowledge workers to capture a larger share of the economic pie. So the key question for any worker as one of these transitions happens is simply this: is this technology a substitute for my work, or is it a complement for my work? Will it do the work instead of me, or will it allow me to do the work more productively? So what can we expect for this industrial revolution? Well, research is starting to shed light, but it's early days. So I want to take a moment to talk about a little bit of my own research, together with Rob Siemens of NYU Stern and Manav Raj of the Wharton School, on these particular issues, sort of drilling down into economic data and into models of how AI progress works to try to understand in a more fine-grained way what the impact on particular job categories is going to be. And there's not time to go into the research in detail. But I can give you a couple of takeaways. The first takeaway is that we seem to have some ability to predict which jobs will be more affected by AI and which less. That the prediction models that we use, ironically, they're AI models, do seem to have some predictive power. That when we compare, when we run those models against past data, what we see is that a prediction of increased impact does correlate with more change in the nature and number of people in a job. So we do seem to have some ability to predict which jobs will be affected. But it's very difficult to predict whether that effect will be a net positive or net negative for an individual worker. In other words, we can predict the magnitude of the impact on particular workers or job categories, but it's very difficult to predict the direction. The key insight, one of the key insights across the research on this topic is that each job is not a single thing, but a job is really a bundle of different tasks and requires a bundle of different skills and capabilities from the worker. And it may be that some of those tasks or capabilities are substituted by AI and others are complemented. And so we need to think about how the components of a job are affected. So let's think, for example, about the transition to self-driving vehicle technology, which we know, if it's not here, will be coming. And let's think about the impact of that on two different workers. Our first worker is a building inspector. The building inspector has to drive to get from one site of their work to another. And so they spend a certain portion of their time driving, and indeed, for many of them, it is a requirement for the job that they're able to drive. Once self-driving technology comes along, that building inspector will no longer need to drive, and that means that the time in the car can be spent doing building inspector things, that can be spent doing the things that leverage their skills and knowledge. They can do research, they can write up reports, they can be a more efficient building inspector because they don't have to spend a part of their day watching the road. Our second worker is the school bus driver. The school bus driver also has a bundle of jobs, not only to drive the bus, but also to supervise the children. And if you've met children, you know why. AI may replace the driving part of the job, and it may, in effect, turn a job which is primarily about driving into a job that's primarily about childcare. And that might not be good for the bus driver, but it might be good for a childcare worker. And of course, we can think about the relative status and wages of bus drivers versus childcare workers in thinking about the impact of that. So, in order to really understand the impact on particular jobs and job categories, you do need to drill down into that data, and our papers and actually really nice visualization that some folks at the Washington Post did would allow you to look into that data and see which job categories are more likely to be affected and which less, across around 700 different job categories in a taxonomy from the Bureau of Labor Statistics. So we don't know whether this revolution will on net increase or decrease economic inequality. I think the evidence is very much out on that question. From a policy takeaway, I'd leave you with a couple things. First, that AI will increase the turbulence in the job market. But second, the US job market is already very turbulent. Our economy creates and destroys around 2 million jobs each month, thankfully creating some more than it destroys. Nonetheless, that's a lot of workers pushed out of jobs or workers who have to change jobs. That causes a lot of pain. And that's a really significant policy problem because the long-term impact on those workers, and especially on their families, is really large and long-lasting. So, AI will make it even more important to have policies that better prepare and protect workers for the economy of the future, and that better buffer those workers and their families against the turbulence of the job market. The good news is that this is not an entirely new policy challenge, but the bad news is it's a difficult policy challenge and one that we have struggled with in the past and will continue to struggle with as we move forward. Thank you.
Thank you, Ed. Closing out our talks for today before we go to the Q&A is Beth Noveck from the Governor's Office.
Thank you so much, Governor, First Lady. Thank you to President Eisgruber. Thank you to Provost Rexford. Thank you to all of your team's partnership in making this fabulous event come off today. We really tremendously appreciate the partnership on this, and thank you also, Governor, to everybody on your team and on our team for really helping this collaboration to happen. We are tremendously excited about this as the beginning of many collaborations. So just this week, I had the pleasure of interviewing Audrey Tang. Audrey, some of you may know, is Taiwan's first digital minister. And Audrey became very famous because she started out as an activist who occupied the floor of Parliament and then became, shortly thereafter, a cabinet minister and now the first digital minister. And what Audrey says about her own job, when asked, what is the digital minister? My first question to her, what is it that you do? She has a beautiful poem that she uses. She says, when we see the Internet of Things, let's make it an Internet of Beings. When we see virtual reality, let's make it a shared reality. When we see machine learning, let's make it collaborative learning. When we see user experience, let's make it about human experience. Whenever we hear the singularity is near, let's always remember the plurality is already here. Now, I am the first chief AI strategist for the state of New Jersey. And my job description, were I to write it, might be a little less elegant, with all deference to the fabulous poets like William Carlos Williams or Robert Pinsky, who come from New Jersey. We are a little more mundane. However, the goal of our efforts, I think, is very much the same, which is to put that humanity that Brad talked about at lunch, which is to put the public interest at the center of how we're thinking about and using AI, not worrying about what AI can do, but thinking hard about what AI should do and putting in place the mechanisms to ensure that we are bounded by our values. We have been doing a lot already, and you've heard the governor talk about many of these initiatives today, and I'll talk about a few more of them, and that are focused squarely on how we can use AI for good and how we in government in particular can be a leader in this regard. So let me say that we are the first state to have put out a policy that actually embraces use of responsible AI, that did not ban the technology, but that went headlong into saying, we're going to look at how we can use these tools, these fabulous tools for processing large quantities of data and text, and use them consistent with our values. That is to say that the use of AI should support our workforce to deliver enhanced services, that we should be treating people as we do with inclusion and respect and ensuring that AI is uplifting our communities, especially the most vulnerable and the most marginalized. That when we use AI, we're going to be transparent, we're going to say when we're using it, and we're going to be accountable to ensure that we are accomplishing our stated goals and solving problems with this tech. And that as we embrace responsible experimentation, we're going to ensure that we maintain control, that we respect privacy and security while we're developing uses that really innovate and improve how we deliver services for people. So when government begins to use AI, I think there's a number of things that we can do to transform how government works and ultimately how democracy functions. What we can do is we can first and foremost create more conversational governance. That is to say, we can be more responsive to citizen needs, supplying people with information not between 9 and 5 when they come to an office, but 24/7. So now, for example, our Office of Innovation, led by Dave Cole in collaboration with our CTO, Chris Ryan, and our colleagues at various agencies, have created a one-stop for our businesses. That is to say, a single site, business.nj.gov, where now 1 million people have logged in just in the last year to get answers to their business questions 24/7. And instead of having to go to 12 different agencies to look for that information. When we create that more conversational interface, we save the taxpayer money, we reduce aggravation, we increase the trust in government and do what we're supposed to do. We're creating the ability now when we talk to residents, when we deliver services like these, we ask people, how can we do a better job? We've always done that, but it was always very hard to do that listening. Now when people send us their comments and say, this is what I need and this is what you can do better for me, we can use AI, and we are using AI to summarize and synthesize what we're hearing from people. We can create a more accessible government. We can use generative AI to communicate more effectively, and that's what my colleagues in the Department of Labor, I think Commissioner Robesauer-Angelo and his team are here. We are redrafting the letters that we use to send claimants for unemployment insurance. When we use generative AI to take a complex letter in government speak and turn it into plain English, that makes it easier for people to read. And in fact, we've reduced the time by 50% that it takes people to read those letters and dramatically increase the response rate in their returning the information that we need to deliver the service to them. This is part of an ongoing modernization and innovation effort using AI and other technologies and data that's allowed us to bring down the time it takes to apply for unemployment insurance, in New Jersey by 48 minutes for each application. I think it's part and parcel of a larger effort that can allow us, oh, there's my unemployment, sorry, one more slide here, to do more with data. And I think that's the biggest potential here, and that builds on a lot of what you've already been talking about, to use data to be able to deliver better services to people. So let me show you just one example here. My colleague Carl Van Horn at Rutgers, who may be somewhere out there, did a fabulous survey this year in which he went out and asked American workers, the Heldrick Center for Workforce Development, put out this survey and said, about their attitudes towards AI. Arthur, this is one of the things is going out and asking people, extremely important. And what people came back and said, 66% of workers came back and said that what we're going to need is more technological skills to achieve our career goals. We know that we need to upskill Ed is telling us we're going to need to learn what we're going to do for that bus driver, and we're going to need to learn how to upskill. And so that's why the Department of Labor has now gone out and built a site called mycareer.nj.gov. There's a nice piece about it in Fast Company just today in honor of the occasion. And what we're using is AI to help workers navigate the challenges of AI by doing something very unique for government agencies. We are providing personalized, customized recommendations to people about their career prospects, about the training that they're going to need to be ready for high-growth, in-demand jobs. I think this site is a model for what other states can and should be doing with AI. So based on the resume information that you upload now, which the state stores securely in its protected cloud. This site, which has two parts, Training Explorer and Career Navigator. Career Navigator offers personalized career advice about the careers that you might want to take based on your existing skills and data. It's going to ensure that the careers that it recommends are well matched to your skills, and it's going to give you predicted pay ranges and job availability, along with direct links to job opportunities. I'll show you what some of it looks like here. And it's going to give me, again, individualized advice about current job openings, as well as the training that I might want to take. And thanks to that data that we're collecting and now using, we also have the ability to tell you not just what that training costs, but what is the employment rate of people who took that training, and whether people who took that training saw their income go up or go down or something else. So while all of us are really accustomed to Netflix telling us what movie we should watch or Amazon telling you what book you should buy, I think it's high time now that what we can do is to take advantage of the data that government collects from businesses and from individuals, and now use AI to provide those kinds of personalized recommendations that can improve people's lives. Public entities are really able to play a really crucial role, I think, in harnessing AI for good. With the proliferation of misinformation and disinformation on commercial websites and on social media, it's increasingly important for trusted public entities to be able to provide reliable data-driven resources. On that training question now, if I go out to a typical commercial website, like shopping for a television or a toaster, it can be really difficult to be able to know what decisions I should make when somebody is always trying to sell me something. But instead, when we as a public entity are using AI to empower informed decision-making, I think we can help combat that spread of misinformation, we can help people make better decisions, and we can help, again, improve people's lives. So how do we get from here to there? I think we've already started on this roadmap, I hope. The first is that we've already created policy that allows us to go out and innovate and to embrace responsible use and to try some of these exciting experiments. Number two, what we're doing is we are supporting our public workers with the incorporation of these technologies. Instead of replacing people, what we're doing is recognizing that the primary thing AI does is to make our workers more productive. So it's AI on tap, not on top. We are helping our talented workforce use these tools to do what they do best, which is to better serve residents. We are providing training and education, and you heard the governor talk about it, and you heard the president of Microsoft say that the most important thing we need to do is to go out and train our public workforce, and that is exactly why the governor has committed that we're going to do exactly that. And we're not doing it in a vacuum. To Arthur's point, we're going out and asking them. We're surveying our workers about what they want from this training, what they know about AI, what they want to know about AI, and what they would like to learn and how they want to learn it. And we also know that one of the most important things we can do is to open up more of our data. We have, obviously, an open data law already in place in New Jersey. We already open up data through our data catalog, and the more that we do that and use that data, the more that we can power these kinds of AI innovations, both for the state and for the private sector. And finally, what we need to do is to collaborate. All day, everyone has emphasized the incredible talent that we have in this state. And so we need to work with the brightest minds and the passionate people together in the academy, in industry, in government, to deliver those solutions to our hardest problems. That's why we have a collaborative cross-sector task force thinking about our AI efforts here. That's why we have the moonshots that you've heard about, and that we have these different initiatives to support, as the governor said, coming together to think ahead about one of the most promising technological developments in human history. We're all here today because we believe in this hopeful vision for AI's future. Of course, we recognize the challenges. We know there are two narratives about the future. There's one about risks, and we have to be careful. But we are all here today, and we invite all of you to join us together with the state of New Jersey to collaborate on embracing these phenomenal tools and the power that they have to improve lives. So thank you very much, and thank you for your collaboration today in this fabulous event. Thank you.
All right, thank you to all the speakers for those fantastic ideas. There are lots of questions on Whova, some spicy ones, I will say. We will get to as many of them as we can. Okay, the first one, does the NSA or some other part of the federal government have models that are as good or better than OpenAI's? If not, how scary is that? Let me take the liberty of adding a part B to this question. The question is, if they don't have those models, how scary is that? Part B is, if they do have those models, how scary is that? I think about a world where the world's intelligence agencies and militaries are building bigger and bigger models and trying to outdo each other. So I'm curious to hear the panel's thoughts on both of those scenarios.
I guess I'll go first. There certainly is a lot of effort within the federal government and within the U.S. intelligence community to try to harness AI to better serve their mission. There's a lot of smart people there, a lot of very serious effort being made there. Are they up to the minute with what some of the leading private sector companies are doing? Probably not for general purpose AI, but certainly in terms of thinking about how AI can serve their mission and how it can be employed, not only to better understand, say, the international threat environment, but also AI has a surprising set of uses to try to help privacy within intelligence agencies. For example, one of the big policy challenges is to ensure compliance with legal limits on how information can be used, especially ones that are downstream of its collection. And so agencies have audit mechanisms that they use to try to make sure that their workers are not misbehaving or misusing their access to this information. And AI can be very useful as part of an audit process to help identify more questionable cases and direct the attention of auditors to situations where there is likely to be a higher risk of misuse. So we're seeing a lot of work on this, but of course there are a lot of open questions about governance. And I know that these agencies are taking this seriously as well.
Any other thoughts on this question? Okay, thank you, Ed. This question is for Arthur. To what extent will deep political polarization stifle growth of trust in AI systems and models?
Yeah, that's a very interesting question. So, the United States obviously faces considerable issues with polarization. And the nature of polarization is that it very quickly morphs from discussions of particular issues, say abortion, immigration, rights for minority groups, so on and so forth, to things that we previously hadn't thought were polarizable. Whether you drive an electric vehicle or not becomes polarized, something that people become polarized around. Where you live, the types of things you do with your spare time. So yes, I am concerned in general that partly because we associate these new technologies perhaps with a certain type of West Coast or with academia, that it might be unappealing and people might become suspicious of it. I'm also concerned much more generally about the potential for dysfunction at, say, a congressional level, where we fail to get money to scientists, or we fail to correctly regulate or deregulate, whatever it might be, the required industries. So I think it is a concern. I'm optimistic, though, that when people see when people in Washington see, what's going on in the states, the laboratories of democracy, they will perhaps find a way to bridge things. In the end, I think, the American story is that compromises are found, so I'm optimistic.
Thank you. Okay, I'm going to combine two questions here, and it's about children and learning about AI. So one part of the question is about opportunities for K through 12 schools to set up and utilize some of these resources. And the other is, what should that education constitute? What are the essential elements that will contribute to an educated citizenry? And at what age should proficiency in using AI tools begin? No pressure.
Well, I'll get us started here. As you can tell, none of us are actually K through 12 educators here, although many of us may have our own K through 12 children at home and have personal views about this question. I will say that for the training that we are developing, for example, for public sector, all of that is free and open. So we have been doing that since I started here in New Jersey 6 years ago at the beginning of the governor's tenure. We have been building training programs and sharing them openly. And that will be the same thing around what we're doing on AI. So that is to say, materials that teach the basics of what is AI and how you can use it in your day-to-day work, how you can use it, and that's adaptable to other scenarios. That can really help, that we're very happy, again, to share and make reusable. And I know other colleagues who are working on this, like the International Society for Technology and Education, which is spearheading the availability of training materials around AI for the K through 12 sector, and to help educate teachers about how they can teach with these tools. So I think it's not just a question of what children want to know, but as we heard in the earlier panel today, it's about how teachers can teach in new ways with these tools, in ways that help to make them more productive, to personalize the education, and to reduce the workload. So I think there's phenomenal applications for education, and if you want to try it for yourself, just go sign up for Duolingo, or sign up for Khan Academy, and you can see what AI can do for education.
I need to give a shout out to a program that we run here at Princeton called Princeton AI for All, which runs a 3-week summer camp each summer for rising 11th graders from historically disadvantaged communities. And it's been going on for several years, and I have to acknowledge here Professor Olga Rusikovsky over here, who is the not only co-founder of the National AI for All organization, but also really the guiding light of the local Princeton program.
Thank you. Okay, so this question is, AI is not policy-driven, it's intellectually driven and people-driven. So what can government do to attract more AI people to New Jersey? And I think by that, the questioner means I'm not sure that AI people are attracted to where the interesting technical problems are, and so how can government do anything to change this is perhaps what is meant.
So I think some of the most interesting work related to AI is not necessarily the technically deepest. Sometimes there are hard societal problems that we can make progress on without generative AI. I mean, sometimes a simple linear regression would be a breakthrough in comparison to how a particular policy program is operated today. And so I think one possible direction for New Jersey or for any other state interested in creating AI policy might be around looking for opportunities to leverage the problem space rather than necessarily the pure technical innovation around AI. That's certainly something the federal government has been doing across agencies. Cities have been coming up with interesting challenges about, how you might use AI to address some particular societal problem. That's attracted a lot of interest. So there's a particular direction.
Just to add, I think one thing that governments can do is make it easy for the people that drive AI to be in a certain place. So there is going to be, it's already upon us, there is going to be a global fight for talent across countries and different parts of the world to get top people to work on AI in those countries. Making that relatively easy, for example, reforming the H-1B immigration process, I've been through it myself, would be a great thing. The US is a very pro-immigration country, and we've got to continue that as we go into this drive to recruit people working in AI.
This question could be for anyone. Why aren't there more entities that are training AI on fairly sourced data, and why isn't there more of an outcry about the opacity of training data?
Well, I'm very upset about it.
What more outcry do folks want? It's like on the front page of the New York Times, the Washington Post, the Wall Street Journal.
Yeah, you want to talk about that? To give people some context.
Yeah, sure. So, I mean, generative AI models are trained, at least the most sophisticated models, are trained on a wide variety of data. Often that data is obtained through scraping web content, sometimes content where the folks who create that content may not like the scraping, may have intellectual property interests they want to assert in that content. And so that's led to tremendous concern. So to resist the premise of the question a little bit, I think, at the point at which one loses count of how many federal lawsuits filed, and again, front page of major national publications, I think there's a lot of attention on this right now.
I believe there was draft legislation introduced just this week by Representative Skiff calling for transparency on training data sources. I forget the details, but it is something people are paying attention to.
Yeah. Well, to give one example of a use of data that has drawn a lot of attention and criticism, there have been efforts by some companies to scrape the internet and collect labeled photographs of people in order to build facial recognition models that might be available even to the public. And that can have really profound implications for privacy, because we've become accustomed to being, by default, anonymous in public places. At least most people are. And if that's no longer the case, it will have really significant implications. So when people collect this data in a widespread fashion on the internet without consent or even the knowledge of the people who have posted these photographs, this has drawn a lot of pushback. So why has this happened? The basic reason is there's not a law against it, and human creativity being what it is, someone will think of doing this and try to make a business opportunity out of it. So in a lot of these areas, I think that legislation or regulation has not caught up to the state of affairs. Certainly that's the case in an area like facial recognition, but in many other areas related to AI as well.
Thank you. Question for Beth. How can your office devote hours to each state agency to better use their data for public good? For example, health inspections.
So how can we devote data for public good?
How can we devote hours, I assume they mean effort, to each state agency to better use their data for public good?
Well, I think it starts with the question already suggests the answer, so yes, is doing public good is what we're here to do and to better serve residents, both in how we make policies and deliver services. Obviously, government already collects a great deal of data and information from people, as well as collects data about the environment and the economy and things going on all around us and part of our role in government, and that's the case at the federal level and at the state level and many localities as well. And so really taking advantage of that data starts with the learning about how we can use these tools to better process that data. What's so exciting, especially about generative AI, there was just a paper out, I think this week, or very recently, at least I read it, says that generative AI is as good, at least, as the intern data analyst, or even a junior data analyst. So what that means is that even people without extensive data science training, and that's always been an issue for government, is that we have never had enough people with advanced data science skills or even tech skills, et cetera, as the private sector. So now the ability to use these tools to enable people who speak English instead of code to be able to go out and potentially manipulate data more easily, to be able to analyze data, to be able to use it, to then make more evidence-based decisions, to then help us improve how we deliver services. And don't forget that data doesn't just include numbers, that data includes words. So that data includes the comments and the feedback and the information that we get from people, our ability to analyze and make use of that, training people in how to do that so that they can understand what does this mean for how I deliver a service is really, really exciting. And the second thing is obviously the collaborations that we can engender with universities and its data scientists and social scientists and others to be able to do that kind of work. So Jonathan, you're right, we're the exception that proves the rule on this panel, being a panel full of people who've done public service and been in academia, or both at the same time. More of that kind of collaboration between the academy and government helps us to be able to bring that kind of computational social science to bear in how we work in government and improve what we do.
Great. Arthur, you said that we should ensure everyone understands how AI models work. But this appears to trivialize the underlying technologies. AI involves complex math and algorithms that will always be beyond the comprehension of the majority of people. So can you explain what you meant?
I can. I think that's a very pessimistic vision of the citizens of the world. So firstly, AI covers a lot of bases. I mean, AI can be something as simple as a linear model. It can be something as simple as a logit used in a certain way, and I think many, many people can understand that. It is true that it's going to be very hard in general to sort of unpack some very complicated, dense neural net with multiple layers and encoders, transformers, and so on, and that could be difficult. But nonetheless, we can give students a sense of many, many difficult physical processes, chemical processes, and we do it all the time. We're right at the beginning of trying to explain these things. We explain the same ideas to students who are 5 and then 10 and then 15 and then college students, PhDs. We change the complexity at which we explain it. And that's the same idea. It's not the idea that we're going to take 5-year-olds and give them a PhD treatment of an encoder. That's not the idea. Although sometimes professors need the treatment for 5-year-olds. So they are inherently complex, but we get people used to the idea of learning about them. That's the point I'm making.
Great, thank you. Let me, by the way, put in a plug for a great paper called The Fallacy of Inscrutability, which was written by Josh Kroll, who got his PhD here many years ago at Felton. And the point that Josh brilliantly makes is that for the purpose of understanding the societal effects of AI, or for putting guardrails around AI, importantly, it's not really necessary to understand the underlying math and algorithms. In fact, it's not even relevant. The things we need to understand are more like the input-output behavior and various other things relating to the training data and the process by which the system was built and how it is deployed. And so again, from that perspective as well, it's a little bit of a different answer than yours, but I think consistent with your perspective. There is a lot we can productively answer about AI models. Okay, let's see. Lots of questions here. I'm trying to pick something that is sufficiently distinct from the topics we've talked about so far. As AI technologies become more integrated into our daily lives, what data sources are government and academic institutions using, especially when the benefits are distributed across all segments of society? Where does Princeton University source data for LLMs? Maybe that second part of the question is for some of the folks who spoke earlier, but maybe you can take the first part of the question.
Yeah, sure. So at least as I understand it, what's going on at the PLI in particular is that we're doing some implementations, or colleagues there like Sanjeev, they're doing implementations of things like Llama 2, and we at least know what was in the training set. And that's just a start. So just to make this distinction for colleagues who may not be familiar, when we talk about something like GPT or ChatGPT, it's closed in sort of two key senses, or it's complicated in two key senses. We don't really necessarily understand the very, very complicated model that takes us from inputs to outputs. It's very, very deep and hard to follow. That's true. But we also don't know what data went into it, right? So even that we don't know. And simply knowing what goes into it, and I mean by that, oh, this was trained on Reddit, this was trained on Common Crawl, this was trained on the archives of the United States Foreign Service, something like this, right? That itself is very informative, and that's part of what we mean by making an AI system open. It's just simply being public about that.
Beth, you want to?
Sure, I'll just chime in. I would say, you know, a lot of the early uses that we're seeing both in New Jersey and in governments around the world is to take data that, that agencies are sitting on already and ingesting that data to be able to answer questions internally, not just externally. So the ability to ingest all of an agency's rules, policies, regulations, you know, training manuals, et cetera, that data becomes a phenomenal corpus for helping that institution to learn from itself. So whether it's training workers to be able to get an answer to a question and speed up how people get trained, whether it's helping call center workers then be able to get answers to their questions so they can better be able to serve a resident, whether it's the ability for policymakers to more quickly understand what are the policies that we've enacted, how have they evolved, where are the gaps, what are we doing. I think there's a phenomenal opportunity that's already being exploited and that we'll see more of that will start with ingesting the data that an institution holds and using that to answer questions internally, and then in parallel to look at what that means for answering questions, providing information, and deliver services externally. Government is awash in PDFs that are lying unloved and unread in drawers, and now they are getting to new life breathed back into them where we can extract that intelligence to get smarter.
Great. Okay. A trivial way to expand the AI workforce is to give green cards to every graduating PhD in AI. Why isn't this being pushed as a high priority item?
It should be.
Talk to Congress.
Well, obviously, immigration policy is difficult, right? But it seems like one of the best ideas there is to make sure that when some brilliant person from anywhere in the world comes here to the US, to Princeton, or to any of the other universities here to get an education and work closely with the folks here, that it would be great for America if those people could stay and move on into industry, into academia, or really anywhere. It seems like a no-brainer from a policy standpoint. And I know, you know, having been an academic and now being in industry, that the difficulty of keeping really skilled and smart people who want to be here is an impediment to our progress and to our capacity as, you know, as a country. I think it's an unforced error.
By the way, I believe there were some items relating to immigration and AI skills in the executive order. Perhaps some of you remember the details better than I do. Okay, you can look it up. Okay, so maybe let's take one last question. And this one might be for Ed, and it might be for others as well. And Ed, if you want to say you already answered it in your talk, I think that's fine too. The question is, what jobs will be replaced first by AI, and what types will see the greatest growth?
I don't know about first versus later. In general, there's really been a shift over time, I should say, that in the past, jobs that were more routine were more likely to be replaced by AI. There's a lot of work. In order to affect any job, it takes a lot of work to apply AI to a particular task. And I think a fruitful way to come at this is to ask, what are the areas in which there's most likely to be investment by companies in displacing or changing workers' roles? What are the places of highest leverage for investment in doing this? I think it's difficult to tell who will be replaced. There certainly are jobs that involve analysis of abstract information, especially in sort of a more cut and dried scenario, are the ones that are, I think, most likely to be affected in a positive or negative way. The ones least likely to be affected, according to our research, are things that involve personal presence or direct human interaction. Dancers, for example, very unlikely to be replaced by AI.
Have you seen those Boston Dynamics robots dancing, though?
Maybe I'll just chime in here very quickly to say that as we've seen and as Ed described with every technological transformation, there are tasks that get transformed. And the question of whether that transformation of tasks leads to jobs being destroyed or created depends a lot on the intent of the employer. So it's really important that we approach these technologies as a productivity enhancing tool. They can help our workers to do more, to do better, to solve harder problems. If we approach them from the perspective of how can I fire workers, reduce customer service, and save money, we're always in an arms race then around this question of job reduction. But what we have to recognize is that where these tools are going to help us in America remain competitive and be innovative is by helping our workers to be more competitive and not replacing them.
Great. That's a great note to end on. That was a really wide-ranging discussion. I hope you enjoyed it. This is not the end of the conversation. Jen will tell us what the next item on the program is going to be. Thank you, everyone. Thank you to the panelists.